They said Keanu Reeves's bodyguard vanished into the Mexican desert. Then, a letter surfaced, linking him to a cartel. Most would have walked away, but Keanu drove straight into danger to find the truth. What he discovered that night didn't just risk his life. It changed everything he believed about loyalty, justice, and redemption. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The night was unusually cold for Los Angeles. Outside the Beverly Grand Hotel, flashes from cameras scattered across the entrance like lightning. Reporters leaned over velvet ropes, shouting questions as the black SUV pulled up to the curb. The door opened slowly. Keanu Reeves stepped out, dressed in his usual understated way, black suit, no tie, quiet presence that drew more attention than any designer outfit ever could. He glanced once at the crowd, nodded politely, and walked toward the entrance. Normally, a tall, broad man named Carlos Diaz would walk beside him, scanning every face, every movement. Carlos had been more than a bodyguard. For nearly 10 years, he was Keanu's shadow, trusted, loyal, always calm, even in chaos. But tonight, the space beside Keanu was empty. The first to notice was a young journalist near the front. "Where's Carlos?" she called out, her voice cutting through the noise. Others picked up on it. "Mr. Reeves, did your bodyguard quit? Is it true he's missing? Are the rumors about Mexico real?" Cameras whirred, microphones pushed closer. Keanu didn't respond. He simply adjusted his jacket and continued walking, the weight of the silence following him through the glass doors. Inside, the hotel lobby shimmered with warm gold lighting. He stopped briefly near the elevator, glancing back at the reflection behind him in the polished marble floor. The empty space, where Carlos should have been, was glaring. Upstairs, the charity gala was already underway. Waiters moved like clockwork between tables. Laughter and music filled the air. Yet, even amid the elegance, Keanu felt a growing unease. It wasn't just that Carlos wasn't there. It was the uncertainty. The man had never missed an event without calling, never vanished without explanation. Later that night, after the speeches and polite smiles, Keanu left quietly. His SUV waited outside under the soft hum of streetlights. He dismissed the driver, preferring to drive himself. As he opened the door, something caught his eye. An envelope tucked under the windshield wiper. Plain white, no name. He hesitated before unfolding it. The handwriting was neat but forceful, as if written in a rush. Only one sentence stared back at him. "He's not who you think he is." The message felt like a chill spreading through his chest. He looked around. The street was mostly empty now, just the distant sound of a siren echoing somewhere downtown. For a moment, he considered crumpling the note, throwing it away, pretending it was a prank. But something about it, something in the precision of the letters, told him it wasn't random. Keanu placed the note in his jacket pocket, started the engine, and pulled onto the main road. City lights blurred past his windshield, but his mind was far from Los Angeles. As he reached a red light, he whispered to himself, "Where are you, Carlos?" The signal turned green. He drove into the night, unaware that his friend's name was about to appear on every television screen in America. The following morning, sunlight spilled through the blinds of Keanu's home in the Hollywood Hills. But the calm view of the city below did little to ease his unease. The note from last night lay on his kitchen counter, right beside a mug of untouched coffee. "He's not who you think he is." The words seemed to burn through the paper. He replayed the previous months in his mind. Carlos had been distant lately, shorter phone calls, excuses for missing rehearsals or public appearances. Keanu had chalked it up to family issues. Carlos had 2 sons in Mexico, boys he rarely talked about, but worked tirelessly to support. Maybe something had happened to them. Maybe that's why he disappeared. But then why no message, no goodbye? His phone buzzed on the counter. It was his publicist, Emma. Her voice trembled with restrained panic. "Keanu, are you watching the news?" He turned on the TV. The morning anchor spoke solemnly. The headline, crawling across the bottom of the screen. Former security officer Carlos Diaz, under investigation for links to Mexican cartel. A photo appeared Carlos in uniform, the same calm face that had stood behind Keanu at hundreds of events. Keanu muted the sound, unable to listen further. He sat still, staring at the image. None of it made sense. The man in that picture had saved lives, stopped threats, carried himself with honor. Could it all have been a lie? Emma's voice came through again, softer now. The police say he's missing. They think he fled across the border. Reporters are already calling for a statement. What do you want me to tell them? Keanu took a long breath. Tell them nothing, he said quietly. Not until I know the truth. After hanging up, he went to his office and unlocked the bottom drawer of his desk. Inside was a small box Carlos had once given him a gift from his hometown near Guadalajara. Inside lay a rosary of dark wooden beads and a folded photo of two young boys standing in a dusty soccer field. Carlos had written on the back, "For them, I fight every day." The memory of that moment struck Keanu hard. He remembered Carlos telling him once that the world judged men too easily, that sometimes the line between survival and sin wasn't as clear as people thought. He picked up the note again, now creased from his grip. Someone wanted him to believe Carlos was a fraud. But why deliver it to him directly? And how did they know where he'd be last night? As he stared out the window, a shadow passed across his mind. Maybe Carlos wasn't running from guilt. Maybe he was running from something, or someone, far worse. Keanu's eyes hardened. He reached for his jacket. The news could say what it wanted, but he wasn't about to abandon the man who'd once taken a bullet meant for him. That evening, as the sun dropped behind the city skyline, Keanu drove toward downtown Los Angeles. He didn't tell anyone where he was going. The roads shimmered with the glow of brake lights and the restless hum of a Friday night crowd. His thoughts were heavier than the traffic around him. Every red light felt like a test of patience he no longer had. He headed to the last place he knew. Carlos frequented a modest gym tucked behind an auto repair shop in East LA. It was where Carlos trained ex-Marines and local security recruits. The parking lot was nearly empty. Keanu parked and stepped out, the air filled with the smell of oil and dust. The front door hung slightly ajar. Inside, the place was silent. Weights lay scattered on the rubber mats, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead. On the wall hung a photo of Carlos and his training team, all smiling, proud. A note was pinned to the corkboard below it, a torn calendar page marked with a date from 3 weeks ago, and a word scribbled in red ink, border. Keanu's pulse quickened. He slipped the page into his pocket. Someone had been looking for Carlos, and they'd found this clue worth leaving behind. A sudden noise behind him, a door creaking. He turned quickly. A janitor stepped out from the locker room, startled to see him. "You're that actor, right?" the man asked. "Carlos used to talk about you all the time." Keanu nodded. "When was the last time you saw him?" The man wiped his hands on a towel. "A few weeks back, looked nervous. Said he was going to make Priest things right." I asked what he meant, but he just said, "Tell Keanu, I'm sorry if I don't make it back." Then he drove off south. Keanu felt a chill crawl up his spine. Did he say we're south? The janitor hesitated, then pointed at the calendar board. "That's all I know. He tore that off before leaving. Told me not to clean it up if something happened to him." Keanu thanked him and left, his mind spinning. The word border echoed louder with each step. Something about it fit too neatly with the rumors on the news. He climbed back into his car and sat in silence. The city stretched before him, glittering, careless, unaware of the storm that was forming beyond it. He reached for his phone, scrolling through old messages until he found Carlos's number. His thumb hovered over the call button. It rang, once, twice, then straight to voicemail. "Carlos, it's me," he said, his voice low but steady. "I don't care what they're saying. I just need to know you're alive. Call me." He ended the call and started the car. As the radio came on, a breaking news alert filled the airwaves. Authorities confirm that former security officer Carlos Diaz is under federal investigation for cartel ties. He is considered armed and dangerous. Keanu gripped the steering wheel tighter. The world might have given up on Carlos, but he hadn't. 2 weeks before the headlines, before the note under the windshield, before the whispers of cartel ties, there had been a sudden silence. Carlos Diaz, the man who had stood at Keanu Reeves' side for 10 years, had simply vanished. No arguments, no warnings, no explanations. It happened on a quiet Wednesday morning. Keanu had just finished a meeting downtown when he received a short message on his phone. It was from Carlos. Only 6 words. Need to step away. Family matters. At first, it didn't raise alarms. Carlos was a private man. He often avoided long explanations, choosing to handle problems quietly. But something about the phrasing cold, clipped, almost formal, didn't sound like him. Keanu read it several times, sensing something off. He typed back immediately. "Everything okay? Do you need help?" No reply. Hours passed. Then a full day. By the second day, concern turned to unease. Keanu tried calling. Each attempt went straight to voicemail. His texts remained unread. Even the emergency contact number Carlos once gave him, only if something's wrong, he had said, was disconnected. That evening, Keanu sat in his living room staring at the empty chair where Carlos would usually sit during meetings. He remembered the first time they met. It was on the set of a film overseas, years ago, when a protest had turned violent outside the studio gates. A man had tried to rush toward Keanu, shouting obscenities, waving a broken bottle. Carlos, still new to the security team, reacted instantly, taking the hit, subduing the man, and asking if Keanu was all right before tending to his own bleeding arm. That single moment sealed a bond that would last a decade. Keanu never forgot it. To him, Carlos wasn't just an employee. He was family. The next morning, Keanu decided to visit Carlos's apartment. It was a small 2-story building in East Hollywood. Nothing extravagant, just a quiet place with potted plants on the balcony and an old red truck parked outside. But as soon as Keanu knocked, he felt something was wrong. The door creaked open at his touch. Inside, the apartment was stripped bare. The furniture was gone. Drawers emptied. Shelves wiped clean. The air carried a faint smell of dust and lemon cleaner, as if someone had tried to erase every trace of a life. Yet one thing remained on the small dining table. A framed photo of 2 young boys wearing matching soccer uniforms, both grinning ear to ear, dirt on their knees, sun in their eyes. Next to it lay a wooden rosary, its beads worn smooth from years of prayer. Keanu picked it up gently, remembering how Carlos always carried one around his wrist. The silence of the apartment pressed down on him. It didn't feel like someone had moved out. It felt like someone had fled. Keanu stood in the middle of the empty room, the faint sound of traffic outside barely reaching through the cracked window. The photo of the 2 boys and the rosary felt like a message one left intentionally, as if Carlos wanted him to see it. On the wall near the door, a small square of paint was slightly darker than the rest. Keanu realized something had once hung there, maybe a framed document or a picture that had been removed in haste. He walked through each room carefully, taking in every detail. In the bedroom, the closet doors were open, hangers swinging slightly. On the nightstand sat a small scrap of paper, half torn and covered in faint pencil lines, what looked like part of an address, ending in Crucis, NM. Keanu folded it into his jacket pocket. Downstairs, the landlord recognized him immediately. The older woman looked worried. "He left last month," she said softly. "Didn't give notice. Just paid cash and asked me not to tell anyone where he was going." "Did he say why?" Keanu asked. She hesitated. Only that he had to fix something he'd broken a long time ago. Keanu thanked her and walked out into the bright afternoon. The world outside felt strange, ordinary people passing by, unaware that a quiet war might be unfolding just beneath the surface. He leaned against his car, staring at the torn address in his hand. Later that day, he drove to a small diner near downtown, one Carlos often took him to after long events. The waitress recognized him immediately. "He was here a couple of weeks ago," she said. "Looked tired." Said he might be leaving town for a while. I asked where to, and he just smiled and said, home. That word lingered in Keanu's mind all the way back to his house. Home. But for Carlos, home was complicated. He had told Keanu once that leaving Mexico wasn't just a choice, it was survival. He'd spoken of growing up in a neighborhood ruled by fear, of losing friends to violence before he turned 18. You can't choose where you start, he'd said once, but you can choose where you stand. That night, Keanu sat by the window, looking out at the city lights. His mind replayed every moment they'd shared on the road, on movie sets, in quiet airports where Carlos always walked 3 steps ahead, scanning for danger. The man he knew was loyal, disciplined, good. Could he have fallen back into something darker? The next morning, Keanu contacted a friend in the LAPD, Detective Maya Grant. She had worked in organized crime for years and had met Carlos several times. Her voice on the phone was calm but heavy. "Keanu," she said, "I was hoping you wouldn't call about him." Keanu gripped the phone tighter. "What do you mean by that, Maya?" There was a pause on the other end. "We've been tracking a cross-border investigation," she said carefully. "Your friend Carlos Diaz's name came up 2 weeks ago. He's not wanted for violence, but there are connections. Wire transfers, phone calls, ties to a logistics network used by the Mexican cartel." Keanu's heart sank. "That doesn't sound like him." "I didn't think so either," Maya replied. "But the FBI believes he crossed into New Mexico 3 days ago. He's been in contact with someone they're already watching. If they catch him, it won't go easy. But if you know anything at all, you need to tell me." He walked to the window, sunlight spilling across the hardwood floor. The city felt suddenly smaller, every noise sharper. "He once told me he had family in Mexico," Keanu said. "He never mentioned their names, but he said they weren't safe. Maybe that's why he went back." "That's possible," Maya admitted. "But if he's involved, it's dangerous for you to try to find him. Promise me you'll stay out of it." Keanu didn't answer right away. He looked down at the rosary on his desk, the one left behind in Carlos's apartment. Its worn beads told a different story, one of faith and guilt, not greed. "I can't promise that," he finally said. "He saved my life. Once. I owe him the truth." Maya sighed. "You're walking into something you don't understand, Keanu." "Then help me understand," he said. But she'd already hung up. For a long moment, he just stood there, listening to the quiet hum of the city. His reflection in the window looked older, wearier. The world might see him as an actor, a star surrounded by luxury, but the people who really knew him understood he lived differently. He valued loyalty over image, truth over comfort. Later that evening, he sat by his desk and wrote down every detail he could remember. The date Carlos quit, the diner visit, the torn note, the word Cruces. He searched maps until he found the small border city Las Cruces, New Mexico. It was near old smuggling routes, the kind of place people went to disappear. The decision formed quietly, but firmly in his mind. If Carlos was there, he needed to find him before the authorities or the cartel did. Keanu packed a small bag. No entourage, no assistants, no cameras. Just him, the note, and the rosary. As he closed the door behind him, he glanced once more at the photo of Carlos's sons, their smiles frozen in time. He whispered, "I'll bring your father home." Outside, the night wind rustled through the palms. Somewhere beyond the horizon lay the desert and the truth that waited within it. The story broke before sunrise. By the time Keanu woke, the world had already decided what to believe. His phone buzzed endlessly with alerts, news outlets, tabloids, and gossip channels, all running the same headline: Keanu Reeves's former bodyguard linked to Mexican cartel. The images flashed in quick succession. Old photos of Keanu and Carlos side by side at red carpet events, airport security shots, and even a few blurry pictures taken outside his home. The captions twisted every frame into accusation. By mid-morning, the media trucks were already parked outside his gate. Reporters shouted questions as he left to meet with his team. Mr. Reeves, did you know about his criminal ties? Were you funding his escape? Are you cooperating with authorities? Each question felt like a blade thrown in his direction. He didn't respond. He never did. But inside, the silence was heavier than ever. At his publicist's office, the tension was suffocating. Emma paced the room, her phone glued to her ear as assistants whispered updates. "It's everywhere," she muttered. "Even morning talk shows are speculating whether you knew. They're calling it the Reeves Cartel connection." Keanu sat at the long glass table, calm on the outside but burning inside. "You think I should respond?" he asked quietly. Emma sighed, setting her phone down. "No, absolutely not. If you say anything now, it feeds the story. Let it die out. In a week, something else will replace it." He leaned back, rubbing his forehead. "And if it doesn't? Then we find another way to control the narrative," she replied. "But please, don't make this personal. Whatever he's done, it's not on you." Keanu looked up at her, his expression firm but sorrowful. "He was my friend. He saved my life once. That makes it personal." Emma froze. "Keanu, the police think he's dangerous. If you go looking for him, it could ruin your career, or worse." He stood, pushing his chair back slowly. "Then it ruins it." Before anyone could stop him, he walked out of the office, slipping past cameras that flared like lightning. Reporters shouted his name, chasing after him, but he didn't break stride. When he reached his car, he sat for a moment in silence, gripping the steering wheel. His phone buzzed again, unknown number. He almost ignored it, but instinct told him to listen. He pressed play on the voicemail. Carlos's voice came through, calm but weary. "If anything ever happens, look after my boys." Then a click. Nothing more. Keanu closed his eyes. The sound of that voice, steady, familiar, almost fatherly, hit him harder than any headline could. The message looped in Keanu's head long after it ended. "If anything ever happens, look after my boys." That wasn't the voice of a criminal. It was the voice of a father who knew danger was closing in. Keanu replayed it again and again, straining for any clue in the background, a car engine, a sound, anything that could reveal where Carlos had been when he recorded it. But there was nothing except silence. Outside, the media storm kept building. Late-night hosts joked about Keanu's secret action movie gone wrong. Political pundits debated whether celebrities should be held responsible for the company they keep. The narrative twisted fast, cruel, and shallow. But the one person who stayed quiet was Keanu himself. He hadn't spoken to any outlet, not even to defend his name. He knew words wouldn't fix this. Only truth could. That night, he sat in his darkened living room, lights off, curtains drawn. On the coffee table lay the rosary and the photo of Carlos's sons. He stared at their faces, wondering if they even knew what the news was saying about their father. His phone lit up again. It was Maya Grant. "You shouldn't be out there on your own," she said the moment he answered. "I saw the press conference. They're turning this into something bigger than it is." "Maybe it is bigger than it looks," he said quietly. "That voicemail, I think Carlos was trying to tell me something before he disappeared." "What kind of something?" "Something about his family, his boys. He wouldn't ask me to look after them unless he thought he couldn't do it himself." Maya hesitated. "Keanu, listen to me. The people he might be mixed up with don't forgive betrayal. If he's crossed a cartel, they'll be hunting him, not just the authorities. You going after him could put both of you in the line of fire." He looked at the rosary again, the beads glinting faintly in the dim light. "I can't let them destroy him without knowing what really happened." There was a long silence on the other end before Maya finally sighed. "Then at least let me help. I still have contacts in the department. We'll trace his last movements, see where he crossed the border. But you need to promise me something." "What?" "If we find him, you don't go in alone." Keanu didn't respond. His eyes stayed fixed on the old photo. "He didn't leave me alone when I needed him," he said softly. "I can't do that to him now." The line went quiet again. Maya's voice came back low, resigned. I had a feeling you'd say that. The following morning brought no peace. The headlines only grew louder, more invasive, more personal. Paparazzi camped outside Keanu's driveway, their lenses aimed like weapons. Helicopters circled overhead, filming his backyard. Even his quiet neighbors began avoiding eye contact, afraid of being caught in the frenzy. Inside, Keanu sat with a cup of black coffee that had long gone cold. The television played another talk show where a panel of experts speculated about his possible connection to organized crime. A retired anchor said, "No one spends a decade beside a man like that and knows nothing." Another chimed in, "Hollywood protects its own. Let's not forget that." He muted the sound. Their voices meant nothing. All he could hear was Carlos's last message, echoing in the quiet house like a ghost he couldn't exorcise. Later that day, Maya came by, in person. Her face was tense, her eyes sharp from lack of sleep. She spread a folder across his dining table, filled with photos and maps. "This is everything we have so far," she said. Border Patrol sighted a vehicle matching Carlos's old truck near Las Cruces. He crossed alone. Keanu studied the photos, grainy images, indistinct. But the shape of the man's shoulders, the way he walked it, was unmistakably Carlos. "That's him," Keanu whispered. Maya nodded. "We also found out who might be after him. The Alvarez Syndicate. They specialize in logistics moving people, weapons, and drugs across the southern corridor. If Carlos worked security for them years ago and tried to get out, that makes him a liability. They'll want to silence him." Keanu leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. So he didn't run from guilt. He ran from death. "Maybe both," Maya said quietly, "but either way, he's in danger. And if they know you're looking for him, you will be too." "I've been in danger before," Keanu said, "but this isn't about me." Maya frowned. "You can't fix this by yourself. You're not a cop. You're not a soldier. You're a man chasing a ghost in cartel territory." He looked at her, calm but resolute. "I'm a man who owes another man his life. That's enough." Maya's expression softened. She closed the folder and slid it toward him. "Then you'll need this. It's everything I could get without raising suspicion. I'll keep digging. But after this, you're on your own." Keanu stood and offered his hand. "That's all I ever asked." As she left, he looked out the window. The cameras still waited beyond the gate, flashes ready, questions loaded. He knew that the moment he disappeared, the noise would only grow louder, but that didn't matter anymore. Somewhere beyond those lights, a friend was running out of time. That night, Keanu packed light, one duffel, one map, and Carlos's rosary. As the sun dipped behind the hills, he whispered to the empty room, "Hold on, my friend. I'm coming." The next morning, Los Angeles disappeared in his rearview mirror. Keanu drove east through long stretches of highway, the city's concrete fading into open land and wind-blown sand. The sun climbed slow and merciless, and the air shimmered over the asphalt like a living thing. The silence inside the car was complete, except for the low hum of the engine and the soft clink of a rosary swinging from the mirror Carlos's rosary. He had mapped the route the night before, following the faint trail that Maya's report suggested. Las Cruces, New Mexico, a place where the desert seemed endless and secrets had room to hide. Each mile carried him farther from comfort and deeper into uncertainty. By afternoon, he stopped at a roadside diner just outside Tucson. The place looked worn but welcoming, with a flickering neon sign that read Maria's Kitchen. Inside, the air smelled of coffee, grease, and cinnamon. A handful of travelers sat scattered among the booths. A waitress with kind eyes brought him a mug of coffee and smiled. "Haven't seen you around here before," she said. "Just passing through," he replied, his voice low. She noticed the rosary in his hand and nodded toward it. "Someone special?" He hesitated. "A friend. I'm looking for him." Before she could ask more, a large man at the counter turned toward them. He was a trucker, middle-aged, sunburned skin, wearing a cap with the logo of a freight company. "You said you're looking for someone?" he asked. Keanu nodded. "Carlos Diaz, mid-40s, ex-security, probably traveling alone." The man rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "Might have seen someone like that a week ago." Tall guy, quiet, driving an old red truck. He stopped at a gas station near Las Cruces, paid cash, looked nervous, asked if I knew any place out there where a man could lay low. Keanu's heart skipped. Did you tell him anything? Yeah, the trucker said. Told him about an abandoned ranch 10 miles south of town. Used to be a smuggling site back in the day, but it's been empty for years. The waitress frowned. That's dangerous country, she warned. Folks go missing out there all the time. Keanu finished his coffee and left a generous tip. Thank you, he said. As he stepped outside, the trucker called after him. Hey, you know the desert out there can kill you quicker than a bullet. Be careful, friend. Keanu nodded once. So can regret. He got back into the car and pulled onto the open road again. The sky was wide, endless blue, bleeding into gold as the sun began to fall. Somewhere beyond that horizon was the man he was looking for, and the truth that might shatter everything. The miles rolled by like chapters in a story he didn't want to read. Each town grew smaller, more forgotten. Gas stations became scarce, the signs older, the roads cracked and sun-bleached. Keanu drove with both hands on the wheel, his eyes steady, his mind replaying memories he couldn't silence. He remembered the first time he met Carlos's sons, Mateo and Luis. It was during a charity event in Santa Monica. Carlos had brought them quietly, standing off to the side while Keanu spoke on stage. Afterward, the boys shyly approached him for an autograph. But instead of a movie poster, they handed him a small soccer ball. Papa says you're the good man from the movies, Mateo said. Keanu had laughed softly and signed it, not realizing how much that small moment would later haunt him. Now, as the wind howled outside his car, that image replayed two boys with wide eyes and their father standing proudly behind them. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel. Whatever trouble Carlos had found, it wasn't just his own life at stake, it was theirs too. As dusk settled, Keanu spotted a faded sign reading El Coyote Motel, vacancy. He pulled in, tired from the endless drive. The place was small, a row of dusty rooms with chipped paint and a buzzing light over the office door. Inside, an elderly man in a denim jacket looked up from his newspaper. Room for one? The man asked. Yes, Keanu replied, sliding over his ID. The man squinted. You look familiar. You're that actor, right? Keanu offered a faint smile. Not tonight. The old man chuckled. Fair enough. You headed south? Yeah. Be careful, the man warned, handing him the key. There's been talk about people snooping around the desert lately. Not the kind you want to meet. Keanu nodded, thanked him, and walked out to his room. Inside, the silence felt almost alive. He placed his bag on the bed and pulled out the rosary. It caught the last sliver of light coming through the curtain, casting a small reflection on the wall. He sat on the edge of the bed, letting the weight of exhaustion settle in. He hadn't slept properly in days. Still, his mind refused to rest. He thought about the gas station the trucker mentioned, the abandoned ranch, the miles of desert that could bury a man and all his secrets. On the nightstand was a small Bible, its cover cracked and faded. He placed the rosary over it and whispered to the empty room. If he's out there, let me find him before they do. Outside, a coyote howled somewhere in the distance, a lonely cry swallowed by the endless dark. Before dawn, Keanu was back on the road. The desert stretched endlessly ahead, painted in silver and blue beneath the early light. His headlights cut through the mist as he followed the highway south, each mile bringing him closer to the border and to the truth he wasn't sure he wanted to face. As the day sun rose, the world changed color. The mountains glowed faintly in the distance, and the sand shimmered like broken glass. He rolled down the window, letting the cool air rush in, clearing his thoughts. On the passenger seat sat the rosary, resting beside a worn map marked with a circle around Las Cruces. By mid-morning, he reached the gas station the trucker had mentioned. It sat isolated off a dusty side road, surrounded by old signs and rusting cars. The clerk behind the counter, a woman in her 40s, looked up from her magazine as he entered. "Morning," she said. "You look like you've been driving a while." "I have," Keanu replied. I'm looking for someone. He might have stopped here about a week ago. Red truck, Mexican, mid-40s, quiet." The woman thought for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Yeah, I remember him. Bought gas, some bottled water, and asked if this road still led to the old ranch. I told him no one goes there anymore. It's nothing but dust and ghosts." "Did he say what he wanted there?" She shook her head. "Didn't have to. The man looked like he was running from something, or toward it." Keanu thanked her and stepped back outside. The heat was rising now, the air dry and sharp. He walked around the side of the building, where a dirt road stretched out into the horizon. Far ahead, he could see faint hills where the land dipped into desert valleys. Somewhere beyond that lay the ranch. He returned to his car, started the engine, and began the final leg of the drive. Hours passed in silence. The land grew harsher, the road rougher. Eventually, he pulled to a stop near a ridge, overlooking a wide stretch of scrubland. The remains of an old wooden fence lined the horizon, marking the edge of the abandoned property. He got out of the car and stood in the wind. The sun was setting again, painting the desert in crimson and gold. He took the rosary from his pocket, holding it tight. The memory came without, warning Carlos kneeling with his sons years ago, teaching them to pray for their father's safety. That moment pierced him deeper than any news report or rumor ever could. He whispered, "I'll bring you home, my friend." The wind carried his words across the empty land, as if the desert itself were listening. Then, with quiet resolve, Keanu started down the path toward the ranch, unaware that the next 24 hours would change everything he thought he knew about Carlos Diaz. The first rays of dawn cut through the horizon as Keanu's car crawled along the dirt road that led to the old ranch. The land was silent, except for the sound of wind scraping across dry grass. He parked 100 yards from the property line, stepping out into the chill morning air. The smell of sand, oil, and decay hung heavy. Ahead stood what remained of the ranch. The main house was half collapsed, its roof caved in, windows shattered. The barn beside it leaned sideways, and rusted vehicles lay scattered around, like bones of another lifetime. Bullet holes riddled the metal siding, and the ground was littered with broken glass and shell casings. Keanu walked slowly, scanning the area, every step deliberate. The crunch of gravel under his boots echoed louder than it should have. A pack of stray dogs lingered near the fence, watching him warily before slinking into the brush. When he reached the porch, he noticed something scratched into one of the wooden pillars. It was a cross roughly carved, the kind people make when they don't have time for words. He touched it lightly, feeling a chill crawl up his arm. Inside, the air was thick with dust. The floorboards creaked with every step. Old crates sat piled in corners, some labeled with faded Spanish lettering, others marked with black tape and military codes. He pried one open and froze. Inside were empty ammunition boxes, bullet casings, and torn papers stamped with Cartel insignias. His stomach tightened. Maya had been right. This place wasn't abandoned, it had been a stronghold. In the kitchen, a few things remained untouched. A tin coffee pot, a cracked cup, and a torn photograph stuck under a candle. Keanu pulled it free. It showed a younger Carlos with a group of armed men, all wearing tactical gear. Their faces were hard, sunburned, proud. But Carlos's eyes told a different story. Tired, hollow, out of place. A sound broke the silence. A faint shuffle of feet on dry dirt. Keanu froze, listening. The sound came from outside near the barn. He stepped carefully to the window and peered out. A shadow moved slow, deliberate, keeping low. His instincts tensed, but he didn't reach for anything. Instead, he stepped onto the porch, calling softly into the air. "Carlos?" No answer, only the wind brushing against the metal sheets. Then, from behind the barn, a figure emerged, thin, unshaven, clothes torn, and covered in dust. The sun caught the edge of a revolver in his hand. Carlos Diaz. His eyes were wild, red from sleeplessness. He raised the gun instantly, pointing it at Keanu. "Don't move," he said hoarsely. Keanu stopped where he stood, hands slowly lifting in the air. "It's me," he said calmly. "It's Keanu." Carlos's jaw tightened. "You shouldn't have come here." The gun trembled in Carlos's hand, his breath ragged, eyes darting between Keanu and the open desert behind him. He looked thinner than Keanu remembered, almost hollow. His beard had grown wild, and his clothes were stiff with dust and sweat. The sight of him made Keanu's heart sink, not out of fear, but sorrow. "I said don't move," Carlos repeated, his voice cracking. "They sent you, didn't they? The feds? Or worse?" Keanu kept his voice steady, calm as a whisper. "No one sent me. I came alone." Carlos laughed bitterly, but there was no humor in it. "You shouldn't be here, boss. You have no idea what you've stepped into." Keanu lowered his hand slightly, just enough to show he meant no harm. "I know enough to see a man running from something he doesn't deserve." "Don't talk like you know me," Carlos snapped. He took a step closer, the barrel of the gun wavering. "You don't know what I've done. I know what you've done for me," Keanu said quietly. "You took a knife meant for me once. You stayed by my side when everyone else left. That's what I know." Carlos's grip loosened for a moment, confusion flickering across his face. "That was a lifetime ago. I'm not that man anymore." Keanu looked at him carefully. "Then who are you?" The question hung heavy in the air. For a long time, Carlos said nothing. Then, his shoulders slumped. He lowered the gun slowly, the metal glinting in the morning light. "A fool," he muttered. "A man who tried to bury his past and failed." Keanu stepped forward, closing the distance between them. "Then let me help you fix it." Carlos's eyes filled with something between anger and pain. "You can't fix this," he said. "No one can. The people I worked for, they don't forget and they don't forgive. They'll come for me, and if they see you here, they'll come for you too." Keanu shook his head. "I've faced worse than threats. You think I'd walk away from the man who protected me for 10 years? Carlos turned his face away, ashamed. "I was never protecting you, Keanu. I was trying to protect myself. The job with you, it was supposed to be my way out. But when they found out I was guarding a Hollywood actor, they used it. I became their eyes, their ears. I fed them scraps, nothing that could hurt you, but it was enough to keep them off my back." The words hit Keanu like a punch, yet his expression didn't harden. It softened. "You're telling me this because you want to make it right." Carlos finally met his gaze, eyes glistening. "Because I know they're coming to kill me before I can testify." The wind howled across the open plain, carrying the faint smell of smoke and rust. Carlos sank down onto the steps of the porch, the revolver resting loosely in his lap. He looked utterly spent, like a man who had been carrying the weight of 2 lives. One lived in daylight, the other buried in shadows. Keanu approached slowly and sat beside him. For a long while, neither spoke. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of things neither man knew how to say. Finally, Carlos broke it. "When I left, I thought I could disappear, start fresh. But the past doesn't die just because you want it to." He rubbed a hand across his face, his voice cracking. "They found me the night I ran. Told me I had 2 choices, come back or vanish for good. I chose to vanish." Keanu studied his friend's trembling hands. "And now? Now they're looking for me because they think I'll talk. And maybe I should." His voice lowered. "Too many people died for their secrets. I used to tell myself I was protecting my family, but that was a lie. I was just scared." Keanu's gaze softened. "Fear doesn't erase courage, Carlos. It's what you do next that matters." Carlos gave a bitter smile, always the philosopher. "I'm not trying to be," Keanu said quietly. "I just know the man sitting here isn't a criminal. He's a father, a man who lost his way." Carlos stared at the horizon, the sun rising behind the mountains. "You shouldn't have come here. They'll see your car, track your plate. You'll be dragged into something you can't walk away from." "I already am," Keanu replied. "You think I can go back to pretending everything's fine while you die out here alone?" Carlos looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly, as if finally accepting the truth. You always did have a stubborn kind of loyalty. Keanu smiled faintly. You taught me that. The two men sat in silence again as the desert wind picked up, scattering dust across the broken yard. Carlos stood and slipped the revolver into his jacket. If we leave, we have to move before dark. I've been watching the ridge they send scouts at night. Keanu rose too. Then we'll leave before sunset. Carlos turned toward him, his expression pained but resolute. Keanu, you don't understand. Once we go, there's no turning back. The cartel doesn't stop. Not for you, not for me. Keanu met his eyes steadily. Then we don't stop either. Carlos exhaled, shaking his head. You shouldn't have come, boss. Keanu placed a hand on his shoulder, his voice calm but firm. I had to. For the first time in days, Carlos allowed himself to believe that maybe he wasn't alone. Inside the crumbling ranch house, the air felt heavier than the desert heat outside. Dust floated through streaks of sunlight slipping between shattered boards. Keanu stood by the window, watching the horizon, while Carlos sat at the old kitchen table, his head in his hands. The silence between them was deep, carrying years of loyalty, guilt, and unspoken truth. Finally, Carlos spoke, his voice low and rough. Before I ever met you, before Hollywood and bodyguards and premieres, I worked for men I should never have trusted. He paused, glancing up at Keanu. It started 15 years ago. My wife had just passed. My boys were still little. Mateo was 5, Luis barely 2. I couldn't feed them, couldn't even keep the lights on. Keanu said nothing, letting the man speak. Carlos continued, his eyes distant. A friend of mine introduced me to a security job. Said it was good pay. No questions asked. I didn't know the full truth at first. Or maybe I didn't want to know. I told myself I was just guarding shipments, protecting convoys. But those convoys weren't carrying food or medicine. They were moving guns and chemicals. By the time I realized, I was already in too deep. He took a deep breath, the sound catching in his throat. When I tried to walk away, they laughed, said no one walks away. Then one night they sent me a photo. My sons playing outside our house in Jalisco. That was their message. Leave, and they die. Keanu's hand tightened slightly against the windowsill. So you stayed. I stayed, Carlos said. For years, I became what they needed me to be. Cold, reliable. But I never killed anyone. I swore I wouldn't cross that line. Still, every con to me. Time I looked at my boys, I saw the monster I was becoming. He looked down, his fingers tracing the edges of the rosary around his wrist. When I came to the States, I thought I was free. I took the job protecting you because it was honest work. You trusted me when no one else did. But the past doesn't forget. A few months ago, one of their men found me in Los Angeles. He told me the DEA was closing in, and the cartel was cleaning house. They thought I might talk. I told them I was out of it, but they didn't believe me. They never do. Keanu finally turned toward him, his expression calm but grave. So they're hunting you now. Carlos nodded slowly. And they won't stop until they've silenced me, or my sons. The wind outside picked up, rattling the broken shutters and whistling through the gaps in the walls. Keanu walked closer, his footsteps soft against the worn floorboards. Carlos didn't lift his head. He sat motionless, staring at the table as if the memories were carved into the wood itself. When did it start again? Keanu asked quietly. When did they find you this time? Carlos exhaled, shoulders trembling. About a year ago. They called from a blocked number, said they knew where my sons lived, that they'd been watching them. I hadn't spoken to my boys in years, Keanu. I cut them off to keep them safe. But that call... He stopped, pressing his palms against his eyes. It broke me. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, weathered phone. I kept this for one reason, he said, sliding it across the table. They use it to contact me. The last message came 2 weeks ago. It said, "The Americans are coming. Run or burn." Keanu read the words on the cracked screen, his expression tightening. The DEA? Yes, Carlos said. They're closing in on the cartel's logistics routes. I helped build those routes. I know where the shipments come in, where they hide the money. They think I'll talk. And they're right, I will. But not until my boys are safe. He swallowed hard, his voice faltering. I sent them away, with help from a priest I trust, in Chihuahua. But if the cartel finds out, they'll go after him too. Keanu placed the phone gently back on the table. And you've been hiding here ever since. Carlos nodded. I thought I could wait it out. But I was wrong. They're already here. I've seen their scouts at night. 2 trucks, maybe 3. They're watching from the ridge. Keanu glanced toward the window. The desert looked empty, silent, peaceful. But he knew better than to trust that illusion. What are you going to do? He asked. Carlos hesitated. I was going to run again, cross further south, maybe disappear in some fishing town. But running only delays the inevitable, so I decided to stay and face it. Maybe if they find me first, they'll leave my boys alone. That's not a plan, Keanu said firmly. That's surrender. Carlos looked up then, his eyes hollow. You don't understand. I've spent half my life living like a ghost. Maybe that's what I deserve. Keanu's tone softened. You don't deserve to die out here alone, hunted for trying to protect your family. You made mistakes, yes, but that's not the whole of who you are. Carlos shook his head. You don't know what it's like to live with that kind of guilt. Keanu's gaze didn't waver. I know more than you think. Carlos looked at him then, searching his face for disbelief, but finding only quiet understanding. The desert light fell across them, cutting long shadows on the cracked floor. His voice trembled as he spoke. You don't understand, Keanu. I've done things that can't be forgiven. I've guarded shipments that destroyed lives. I turned away when people begged for help. I told myself I was doing it for my kids, but really I was doing it because I was afraid. Keanu didn't interrupt. He walked to the window, his eyes scanning the horizon. You said the DEA is closing in. If they find you first, they'll take you in as a suspect. But if you go to them willingly, tell them everything, you might live to see your sons again. Carlos gave a hollow laugh. You really think they'll believe me? A man with my record? They might, Keanu said, turning back toward him. Especially if someone they trust stands beside you. Carlos frowned. You're talking about yourself. Yes. The older man shook his head quickly. No, you can't. If you get involved, they'll drag your name through the mud again. They'll think you're covering for me, or worse. I don't care what they think, Keanu said quietly. I care about what's right, and what's right is making sure you have a chance to tell your story to make peace with your past. Carlos's hands trembled as he held the rosary. I don't deserve peace, he whispered. You don't understand the nightmares, the faces of the men I worked beside, the ones I didn't stop when I should have. I see them every time I close my eyes. Keanu stepped closer, lowering his voice. Then don't close your eyes. Keep them open and start fixing what you can. You can't change the past, Carlos, but you can still protect your son's future. You can still do something good before it's too late. Carlos looked down, tears gathering in the corners of his eyes. I don't have the strength for that anymore. Yes, you do, Keanu said softly. You just forgot what it feels like to be seen as something other than a mistake. The room fell silent again. A gust of wind blew through the broken window, scattering dust between them. Carlos's shoulders began to shake. He covered his face with his hands and broke down completely. When he finally spoke again, his voice was barely audible. I deserve punishment. Keanu placed a hand gently on his shoulder. You deserve a second chance, too. Carlos looked up, his eyes red and swollen. For the first time in years, someone wasn't looking at him with judgment but with faith. Outside, the desert wind carried the faint sound of movement in the distance, but neither man noticed. For that brief, fragile moment, redemption didn't seem impossible. The morning light burned hot through the cracks of the ranch house. Keanu and Carlos had barely slept. The night had been filled with distant sounds, engines echoing faintly in the desert, a dog barking far away. the uneasy silence that comes before danger. Carlos sat by the window with his revolver resting across his knees. Keanu poured the last of their water into 2 metal cups. The stillness broke when Keanu's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. It was Maya. He answered immediately. "Keanu, where are you?" Her voice was sharp, tense. "Near Las Cruces," he said quietly. "With Carlos." There was a long pause. "You found him?" "My God, Keanu, do you know what you've done? The DEA has surveillance all over that region. They already know your car crossed the border zone." "Then they know I'm not hiding," Keanu replied calmly. "Not hiding?" Maya's tone turned fierce. "You're in the middle of cartel country. You think this is a game? If they spot you, they won't ask questions. They'll shoot first." Keanu stepped outside the doorway, scanning the horizon. "He's ready to turn himself in," he said. "But he wants protection for his sons first. I need your help to make that happen." Maya hesitated. "If he cooperates, they'll cut a deal. But you can't stay there. The DEA wants him alive, but the cartel wants him dead, and they already know you're involved. We have to move you both now." "Where?" "There's a safe house near Deming," she said. "It's old, off the grid, used for witness extractions. I'll send you coordinates, but you have to drive without being seen." Keanu glanced back inside at Carlos. "We'll make it, Keanu," she added, her voice lowering. "They've already spotted your license plate on a traffic camera near the interstate. You're running out of time." The call ended. Keanu looked down at the phone, then at Carlos. "We need to go," he said. "Now." Carlos stood slowly. "They're tracking you?" "Yes." "Then I'll go alone," Carlos said firmly. "If they catch me, at least they'll leave you out of it." Keanu shook his head. "You said they don't forgive betrayal. If you're caught alone, you'll never make it alive. We go together." Carlos's jaw tightened. "You don't owe me this." "Yes, I do," Keanu said, picking up the keys. "And we're not wasting another minute." Carlos looked at him for a long moment, then nodded reluctantly. Together, they stepped into the blinding light of the desert. The journey toward the safe house and the storm waiting on the road had begun. The car rumbled down the cracked dirt road, leaving the burned ranch behind like a scar fading in the distance. The sun had climbed high, baking the desert into a haze of gold and white. Keanu kept both hands tight on the steering wheel, eyes fixed on the endless horizon. Carlos sat beside him, silent, his revolver resting on his lap. Every few minutes, he scanned the rearview mirror, his jaw set hard. They had been driving for less than an hour when the first sign of trouble appeared, a thin trail of dust rising in the distance behind them. Keanu noticed it immediately. "We've got company," he said quietly. Carlos turned. 2 trucks, maybe 3, he murmured. "They're not locals." Keanu pressed down on the gas. The tires kicked up dirt as the car sped forward, bouncing over the uneven terrain. The road curved along a dry riverbed, leading toward a stretch of old ranch fences and broken telephone poles. The engines behind them grew louder, closer. Carlos rolled down his window, squinting against the wind. "They're cartel scouts," he said. "They always travel in small groups before the main crew arrives. If they see you with me, you're marked." "They've already seen me," Keanu replied, keeping his tone steady. "We just need to stay ahead of them long enough to reach Deming." The first gunshot cracked through the air, echoing across the open desert. A bullet slammed into the rear bumper, sending sparks flying. Carlos ducked instinctively. "They're not trying to scare us, they're aiming to kill." Keanu swerved sharply onto a narrower trail, tires grinding through gravel. The dust rose thick behind them, clouding the vision of their pursuers. Another shot rang out, then another. The mirror shattered, spraying tiny fragments across the dashboard. Carlos looked over at him. "You can't outrun them forever. Let me go. If they get me, they'll stop chasing." Keanu's grip tightened on the wheel. "That's not happening. This isn't your fight." Keanu met his eyes for half a second. "It became my fight the moment they threatened your sons." Carlos fell silent, staring out the window as the wind roared around them. A sudden curve appeared ahead, leading into a stretch of low hills and abandoned mining shacks. Keanu made a split-second decision, slamming the brakes and turning sharply into a narrow canyon trail. The pursuers sped past the intersection, missing the turn completely. He drove deeper into the canyon until the road ended near an old, boarded-up mine entrance. He stopped the car, both men breathing hard. Dust settled around them in a quiet cloud. Carlos turned toward him, his voice low. "You're crazy, you know that?" Keanu gave a faint smile. "Maybe." But it worked. Keanu killed the engine, and silence filled the canyon. The air was thick with the smell of dust and hot metal. Both men sat motionless, their hearts pounding in the quiet aftermath of the chase. Somewhere far behind them, engines echoed faintly as the scouts searched the desert, unaware of where their prey had vanished. Carlos peered out the window, scanning the ridges. "They'll circle back. These men don't give up easily. Then we make sure they don't find us," Keanu said, pushing open his door. He motioned for Carlos to follow. Together, they pushed the car toward the mine entrance. It was old. The wooden beams splintered. The warning signs faded. But it was deep enough to hide a vehicle and two men desperate to disappear. It took every ounce of strength to roll the car inside, the tires crunching over gravel and rusted rails. When they finally stopped, Keanu dragged an old sheet of corrugated metal across the opening, blocking most of the light. Inside, the darkness settled like a heavy blanket. They stood in silence, catching their breath. The only sound was the faint echo of dripping water somewhere deep in the tunnels. Carlos leaned against the car, wiping sweat from his brow. "You shouldn't have risked that," he said quietly. "If they caught us, it would have been the end for both of us." Keanu sat down on a rock, his breathing steady. "You already risked your life for me once. You think I forgot?" Carlos looked at him, puzzled. "That night in Vancouver," Keanu continued, "the stalker with the knife. You stepped in front of me without hesitation. You didn't think about your safety then. That was different," Carlos said. "That was my job." Keanu shook his head. "No, Carlos. That was who you are. You protect people even when it costs you. You've spent your whole life doing that, even for the wrong people." Carlos stared at the ground. "And look where it got me. Hiding in the dark. Alive," Keanu said simply. "And that means you still have a chance to make things right." The silence lingered between them, broken only by the faint hum of the wind outside. Carlos sat down beside him, his shoulders slumped. "I don't understand why you're doing this," he said finally. "You could have walked away. You should have." Keanu glanced toward the faint sliver of light seeping through the metal sheet. "Because when someone saves your life, you don't measure the cost of saving theirs." Carlos looked at him for a long time, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he nodded. "You're a stubborn man, Keanu." A faint smile touched Keanu's lips. "So I've been told." Outside, the sound of engines faded into the distance. For the first time since dawn, the desert grew still again. Inside the dark mine, two men sat side by side, no longer enemies of circumstance, but brothers in survival bound by loyalty and the faint hope that redemption was still possible. The mine was quiet except for the steady drip of water echoing somewhere deep inside. A faint lantern cast a weak circle of light, flickering against the jagged walls. The smell of dust and rust filled the air. Keanu sat near the car, his back against the cool stone, while Carlos rummaged through a small duffel bag, pulling out a half-empty bottle of water and 2 protein bars. He tossed one to Keanu. "Dinner of champions," he said with a faint grin. Keanu caught it, smiling faintly. "Better than most catering I've had on set." For the first time since their reunion, the tension between them eased slightly. They sat in silence for a while, the flickering lantern between them. Outside, faint engines rumbled in the distance, the sound of vehicles sweeping the desert for any sign of movement. Carlos broke the silence. "You know, I still think about that night in Vancouver sometimes, the one with the stalker. You ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't stepped in?" Keanu looked up from the lantern flame. "Every time I read another headline about someone getting hurt because of fame, I think about it." Carlos nodded slowly. "I remember it like it was yesterday. That man came out of nowhere, screaming your name like a curse. When he pulled the knife, all I could think was, not again. I'd seen that look before in Mexico. The same kind of madness. You freeze once in your life, you never freeze again. He rubbed his wrist, the scar barely visible under the lantern's glow. That night changed everything for me. For the first time in years, I felt like maybe I'd finally done something right. Keanu's expression softened. You did more than that. You saved me. Carlos shook his head. You saved me after that. You treated me like I was worth something. No one had done that in a long time. The air between them grew heavier, filled with shared understanding. After a moment, Keanu said quietly, You ever think about forgiveness? Carlos hesitated. Every day. I ask for it, but I don't think I deserve it. Maybe it's not about deserving, Keanu said. Maybe it's about choosing to live like you're forgiven, even when the world won't let you forget. Carlos stared at him, unsure how to respond. You sound like my mother, he muttered with a faint smile. She used to say that to me when I was a kid. What happened to her? She passed years ago, Carlos said, voice soft. Heart failure. She died praying for me to change. I promised her I would. Took me a long time to mean it. The two men sat in silence again. The lantern hissed softly, throwing shadows that danced across the walls like memories trying to come back to life. The lantern burned low as the night deepened. The desert wind moaned faintly through cracks in the mine, whispering like a warning from another world. Keanu leaned forward, elbows on his knees, watching the flame tremble. Across from him, Carlos stared into the dark tunnel, lost in thoughts too heavy to speak aloud. Keanu finally broke the silence. You know, I used to think success could heal everything, he said quietly. Money, fame, recognition. It was supposed to fix the loneliness, the grief, but it never did. Carlos looked over at him. You're talking about your family. Keanu nodded slowly. My father left when I was a kid. My sister got sick years later. I spent months at her bedside, watching her fade. Every time I thought I'd made peace with the past, something reminded me that I hadn't. That's the thing about loss, it doesn't end. It just changes shape. Carlos studied him for a long moment. Funny, I thought you had it all figured out. I wish, Keanu said. People see the smile, the calm. They don't see the sleepless nights, the guilt, the questions that never stop. Carlos's voice was soft, full of quiet understanding. We're both haunted men then. Maybe, Keanu said, his tone gentle. But maybe that's what keeps us human. Outside, an engine rumbled faintly. Both men froze. The sound was distant, but real vehicles moving slowly across the plain. Carlos grabbed the lantern and dimmed the flame. They sat in total darkness, listening. The hum grew louder, then began to fade again. Patrols passing through, searching, waiting for movement. When the sound disappeared into the distance, Carlos exhaled shakily. They're close, he whispered. If they find this place, we're done. They won't, Keanu said. We'll move before dawn. Carlos leaned back against the wall, exhaustion catching up to him. His voice came out hoarse. You should sleep too. I will, Keanu said. Later. You always like this? What do you mean? Always putting others first. Always standing between people and the fire. Keanu gave a faint, tired smile. Maybe it's my way of balancing the scales. Carlos's eyes fluttered closed, the lines of worry softening on his face. Within minutes, he was asleep, his breathing steady, his head tilted toward the light. Keanu stayed awake, watching the faint glow from the dying lantern. His thoughts drifted to everything that had led them here. The note, the headlines, the silence that followed. He reached into his pocket and felt the small photo of Carlos's sons, their smiles frozen in a better time. He whispered, You'll see them again, my friend. The night stretched on, quiet but alive. Somewhere outside, the engines began to fade into memory, swallowed by the desert's vast emptiness. Keanu stayed awake until the first hint of dawn touched the sky through the cracks in the metal sheet. He looked at Carlos one last time before standing to keep watch by the mine's mouth. The desert wind brushed against his face, cool and sharp, carrying both danger and promise. In that fragile stillness, Keanu understood something he hadn't before. Redemption wasn't found in grand gestures, it was found in nights like this, in loyalty, in the choice to stay when walking away would be easier. The first light of dawn crept across the desert, painting the sand in soft shades of gray and rose. Keanu and Carlos stepped out from the mine entrance, blinking against the cool morning air. The storm of the night had passed, but a heavier one was building an invisible one. Keanu helped push the car from its hiding place. The engine coughed before roaring back to life. The headlights cut through the dust, revealing the endless stretch of highway leading east toward El Paso. They had less than 200 miles to reach Maya's contact, but every mile carried risk. Carlos stared out the window as they drove. His voice was quiet, almost resigned. "Once my boys are safe, I'll turn myself in. No more running, no more hiding." Keanu kept his eyes on the road. "You'll get your chance, but not before they're protected." They drove in silence for a while, the hum of the tires filling the space between them. Then, Carlos spoke again, his tone heavy. "You ever wonder why some men are given second chances, while others die before they can make things right?" Keanu thought for a moment before answering. "Maybe it's not about who deserves it. Maybe it's about who's willing to take it." Carlos nodded slowly. "Then maybe it's time I did." By late morning, they reached a small roadside chapel that stood alone in the desert. A white cross leaned crookedly beside the door, and faded murals of saints covered the walls. Keanu parked the car behind the building and turned off the engine. "This is where we find him?" Carlos asked. "Yes," Keanu said. "Father Ramon. He helped a friend of mine years ago. He doesn't ask questions, he just helps people get to safety." They stepped inside the chapel. The air was cool and still, carrying the faint scent of wax and dust. A single candle flickered before the altar. Moments later, an older man in a brown robe appeared from a side door. His weathered face broke into a tired smile. "Keanu Reeves," he said softly. "I never thought I'd see you again." Keanu smiled faintly. "It's been a long time, Father." Ramon studied Carlos. "And who is this man you've brought into my church?" "A friend," Keanu said simply. "He's in trouble. He needs help getting a message to the DEA, quietly. The cartel can't know." Father Ramon's face grew serious. "That's a dangerous request, my son. If they're watching the phone lines, even one wrong word could bring them here." Keanu reached into his jacket and handed him a folded note. "Use this code. Maya Grant will understand it. She'll make sure the message goes to the right hands." The priest took the note carefully, nodding. "I'll make the call." As he disappeared into the back room, Keanu turned to Carlos. "This is it. Once he makes that call, we'll head north to the safe house. No more detours." Carlos looked toward the altar, his lips moving in silent prayer. "If anything happens, promise me you'll tell my sons the truth that I tried to fix what I broke." Keanu met his eyes, steady and calm. "You'll tell them yourself." Minutes passed in tense silence. The faint crackle of an old landline echoed from the back room where Father Ramon made the call. Keanu stood near the doorway, glancing out the narrow window at the lonely highway beyond. The desert wind had begun to pick up again, carrying a low, distant hum. Carlos sat in the pews, his hands clasped tightly around the rosary. Father Ramon returned a few minutes later, his expression tight. "The message has been sent," he said softly. "Maya's people will be waiting near the El Paso checkpoint before dusk." "But," Keanu turned. "But what?" The priest hesitated. There was interference on the line. Static. Too much of it. Someone might have been listening. Carlos stood immediately, his instincts sharpening. They traced it. Ramon looked between them. "I don't know, but I recognized the sound. It wasn't government. It was something else. I fear the wrong ears might have heard our voices." Keanu's stomach sank. "How much time do we have?" "Not much," Ramon said. If they were listening, they'll send men. You must leave now. Carlos gripped Keanu's shoulder. We can't go north, they'll expect that. We should head south, circle back to the highway later. Keanu nodded. All right, we move. They shook the priest's hand quickly. Thank you, Father, Keanu said. Ramon gave a small nod. God be with you both, and if you make it through, tell the world there are still good men in dark places. They stepped outside into the glaring daylight. The horizon shimmered under the heat. Keanu started the car, kicking up a cloud of dust as they pulled away from the chapel. For a while, the road was empty. But then, faintly, the sound of engines echoed from behind them, 3 vehicles, moving fast. Carlos looked back, his face tightening. They found us. Keanu pressed the gas. The car shot forward, weaving between the dry shrubs and rock ridges. The vehicles behind them closed in, black SUVs bouncing over the sand, sunlight glinting off their windshields. Bullets sliced through the air, pinging off the back bumper. Carlos ducked down, shouting, "They're aiming for the tires." Keanu swerved sharply to the right, dirt exploding behind them. "Hold on," he shouted. The chase tore across the open plain, the sound of engines and gunfire blending into a storm of chaos. Dust clouds rose so thick they could barely see 10 feet ahead. Carlos leaned out the window, firing 2 warning shots into the air. "They're signaling for backup," he yelled. Keanu's eyes locked onto a rocky pass ahead a narrow canyon road, almost invisible from the highway. He turned the wheel hard and sped toward it. The car jolted violently as they entered the canyon, scraping against rocks, but it gave them cover from the gunfire. Behind them, the SUVs skidded to a halt at the entrance, engines idling. Then, slowly, they began to fan out. Carlos looked over at him, sweat dripping down his face. "They're not giving up." Keanu slowed the car, his voice steady despite the tension. "Then we don't stop until we reach that border." Carlos exhaled, gripping his revolver tighter. "You're out of your mind." Keanu gave him a faint, grim smile. "You said that yesterday." Another bullet cracked past the window, shattering glass. Carlos ducked again. "You shouldn't risk your life for me." Keanu's tone was calm but firm. "You already did it once." For a brief second, Carlos looked at him, eyes wide with emotion. Then he nodded slowly, understanding the truth behind the words. They both knew this wasn't just a mission, it was redemption, shared between 2 men who refused to leave each other behind. The canyon narrowed, the light dimming as they drove deeper into the shadows, engines roaring like thunder in the hollow desert. The afternoon sun blazed down on the open highway, turning the asphalt into a shimmering river of heat. Keanu's car sped north, tires humming against the road, dust curling up in their wake. Behind them, the canyon stretched like a scar in the desert, silent now, but not safe. Carlos sat in the passenger seat, clutching his side. His breathing was shallow, uneven. "They hit the gas tank back there," he muttered. "We're lucky it didn't explode." Keanu glanced over, jaw tight. "We're not lucky. We're being chased by killers." Carlos gave a weak chuckle. "You always did have a way with optimism." "Save your strength," Keanu said. "We're almost at the highway overpass. Maya's team should be close." He checked the GPS on the dashboard. 1 bar of signal flickered in and out. The coordinates Maya had sent were only 15 miles ahead, near a derelict service road just before the El Paso checkpoint. They just had to make it that far. But as they crested the next hill, Keanu's stomach dropped. 2 black trucks sat across the underpass below, blocking both lanes. Their doors were open, men moving behind them with rifles drawn. "It's a trap," Keanu said sharply. Carlos straightened, his hand tightening around the revolver. "They were waiting for us." Keanu slowed the car, pulling it off the main road and behind a concrete barrier. Bullets cracked against the side instantly, showering the air with sparks. Both men ducked low. Carlos gritted his teeth. They must have intercepted Ramon's call. Keanu scanned the area quickly. "If we stay pinned here, we're dead. We need to move." "Move where? They've got both ends sealed." Keanu looked toward the left shoulder, where one of the trucks idled with smoke coming from its engine. An idea sparked. Maybe we can even the odds. He motioned for Carlos to stay down, then crawled toward the rear of their car. The air was thick with gunfire and heat. He found an old gas can in the trunk half full. He cracked the cap open, poured a thin trail of fuel along the ground, and let it run toward a pile of dry brush near the barrier. Carlos's eyes widened when he realized what he was doing. "You're not planning to..." Keanu grabbed a small flare from the emergency kit, struck it against the concrete, and tossed it onto the trail. The flames shot up instantly, racing across the ground until they reached the brush pile. Within seconds, a curtain of thick black smoke rose into the air, billowing between them and the attackers. The sudden cover threw the gunmen into confusion. Shouts echoed through the haze, their aim thrown off as bullets ricocheted blindly. Keanu ducked back behind the barrier, his chest heaving. "Now," he shouted. Carlos pushed up, returning fire just enough to keep their pursuers back. They moved quickly toward the opposite side of the underpass, crouched low, the heat from the fire washing over them. Through the thick smoke, shapes darted and voices shouted in Spanish orders, panic and confusion. Keanu and Carlos reached the far side of the overpass, just as another burst of gunfire cracked through the haze. Bullets chipped the concrete pillar behind them, sending dust into their eyes. Keanu pulled Carlos down beside him, shielding him from the flying debris. "Stay low," he said, breathing hard. "They can't see us through the smoke." Carlos coughed, clutching his ribs. "You've bought us maybe a minute. Then that minute better count," Keanu said. He peered around the pillar, eyes narrowing. One of the trucks had caught part of the burning fuel trail. Flames crept up its side, licking the metal. The gunmen scrambled to move their vehicles, shouting orders. It was the distraction he needed. Keanu reached into the glove compartment and grabbed a road flare. He glanced at Carlos. "Cover me for 10 seconds." Carlos's hand shook as he raised his revolver. 10 seconds, he said through gritted teeth. Keanu ran from behind the barrier, darting across the highway under a storm of bullets. He slid behind one of the parked trucks and jammed the flare under the leaking fuel tank. The flames hissed, then flared bright, sending a wave of fire under the chassis. He sprinted back to cover, diving behind the pillar just as the truck erupted in a thunderous blast. The explosion rocked the underpass. A wall of smoke and flame consumed the road, forcing the remaining gunmen to fall back. Carlos ducked, shielding his head. "You really don't do subtle, do you?" Keanu gave a faint, breathless smile. It got their attention. Through the rising smoke, distant sirens wailed faint at first, then closer. Vehicles were approaching fast from the north. Carlos frowned. "Please tell me that's not more of them." "It's not," Keanu said. "That's Maya." A convoy of unmarked SUVs burst into view, skidding to a stop behind them. Agents in tactical gear poured out, returning fire. The air filled with shouts and gunfire as the cartel's remaining men scattered toward the desert. One of the agents waved to Keanu. "We've got it from here. Stay down." Carlos tried to rise but stumbled, falling hard to one knee. Blood seeped through his shirt near his shoulder. Keanu caught him before he hit the ground. "You're hit." Carlos's breathing came in shallow bursts. "It's not bad," he murmured, though his face said otherwise. Keanu eased him to the ground, pressing a hand over the wound. "You're gonna make it," he said firmly. "Just hold on." Carlos looked up at him, his eyes dim but steady. "If I don't, tell my sons." "Don't," Keanu interrupted. "You'll tell them yourself." The firefight began to fade as the agents gained control of the scene. Two of them ran over with a stretcher, shouting for a medic. Carlos's head rested against Keanu's arm. "You should have left me," he whispered weakly. Keanu's voice was calm, almost tender. "I told you before, Carlos. You saved my life. Now it's my turn to save yours." As the medics lifted him onto the stretcher, Carlos's grip found Keanu's hand. His voice was faint, but clear. "Then I guess we're even." Keanu watched as the paramedics rushed him toward the waiting vehicle, the sun setting behind a haze of smoke and sirens. The sterile lights of El Paso General Hospital buzzed softly above the recovery room. The air smelled of antiseptic and distant rain. Carlos lay in bed, his right shoulder bandaged, his wrist cuffed to the steel rail. An oxygen tube rested under his nose. Despite the painkillers, his face twitched from time to time, the memories of gunfire and desert wind still alive behind closed eyes. Keanu sat beside him, silent, watching the heart monitor's steady rhythm. It was the first time in days he'd allowed himself to breathe. Around them, agents moved quietly in the hallway, their shadows passing across the frosted glass window. When Carlos finally stirred, his first instinct was to pull his arm free. The handcuff rattled. He blinked, trying to sit up, his voice hoarse. Where are we?" "Safe," Keanu said softly. "El Paso General. Maya's people got us here after the ambush." Carlos turned his head weakly toward him. "The others?" "They were arrested. Maya's team took them into custody." Carlos let out a tired breath. "You shouldn't have stayed, Keanu. They could have killed you." Keanu's tone was calm but firm. "If I'd left, you'd be dead. We both know that." Before Carlos could answer, the door opened. 2 DEA agents entered, both in plain clothes but carrying the kind of authority that filled the room. One was a tall man with gray hair, the other a younger woman with sharp eyes and a folder in her hand. "Mr. Diaz," the woman said, glancing at the handcuffs, "you're under federal custody until further notice." "We'll need a full statement about your involvement with the Alvarez syndicate." Carlos swallowed, his voice barely above a whisper. "I already told your agents everything." The man stepped forward. "Then you won't mind repeating it for the record." Keanu stood up. "He's not ready for this. He just came out of surgery." The man looked at him coolly. "And you are?" "Keanu Reeves," he replied, steady and polite. "I'm here as a witness. I'll testify on his behalf." The younger agent frowned. "With all due respect, Mr. Reeves, this man worked for one of the most dangerous cartels in the country. Why would you put your reputation on the line for him?" Keanu looked at Carlos, then back at her. "Because he risked his life for mine, and because I know a good man when I see one, especially one who's trying to make things right." The gray-haired agent raised an eyebrow. "You realize what you're asking us to believe? That a man with cartel ties suddenly found redemption?" Keanu didn't waver. "I'm not asking you to believe. I'm asking you to listen." For a long moment, the room went still. Then, from the hallway, another voice broke the tension. "You should listen." Maya Grant stepped into the room, her badge clipped to her jacket, her expression hard but protective. "This man," she said, nodding toward Carlos, "risked his life to get us evidence we couldn't find in 10 years. Without him, we wouldn't have stopped half the shipments crossing this border." The agents turned toward Maya, surprised by her tone. She stepped closer, holding up a file thick with documents. "Carlos Diaz has already given us the location of 3 major storage sites," she said. 2 were raided this morning. He's cooperating fully. Without him, dozens more lives would be at risk. The younger agent hesitated, then nodded slowly. "If that's true, we'll need formal confirmation." "You'll have it," Maya replied sharply. "But for now, he needs medical rest, not interrogation." The senior agent sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Fine. We'll suspend questioning for 24 hours. But if he tries to run, he won't," Keanu said, his voice calm but firm. "He's done running." The 2 agents exchanged a look, then turned and left the room, the door closing softly behind them. For a moment, the only sound was the rhythmic beep of the monitor. Carlos exhaled deeply, his eyes closing. "I never thought I'd hear anyone defend me again," he said. Maya leaned against the wall, folding her arms. "You earned it, Diaz. Just don't waste it." "I won't," he said quietly. Keanu turned to her. "His sons, he told me, they're still in danger." Maya nodded. "We've already moved them." The priest confirmed their location before the call was compromised. They're under witness protection now, with new identities. Safe. Carlos's eyes snapped open. "They're safe?" "They are," she said. "They'll get to start over, far from this." Tears welled in Carlos's eyes, sliding silently down his face. He tried to speak, but his voice caught in his throat. Keanu placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You did it," he said softly. "You kept your promise." A few hours later, as the sun began to set beyond the hospital blinds, Maya returned with a tablet. "We've arranged something," she said. "Your sons want to talk to you." Carlos's breath hitched. His hands trembled as Maya placed the tablet on his lap. The screen flickered, then revealed two young faces, Mateo and Luis. They looked older than in the photo Keanu had found in the apartment, but their eyes held the same warmth. "Papa?" Mateo's voice cracked through the speaker. "Is it really you?" Carlos choked back a sob. "It's me, mijo, it's me." Luis leaned forward. "They told us you were hurt." "I'm okay," Carlos said, wiping his eyes with his free hand. "I'm going to be okay now." The boys smiled through their tears. "We love you, Papa." Carlos broke completely then, shoulders shaking. "I love you too," he whispered. "More than anything." Keanu stepped back quietly, giving them privacy. He watched the man, who had once been hardened by years of fear, now undone by a simple truth. Love had survived what hate could not. When the call ended, Carlos looked up at him, exhausted but peaceful. "They saw me cry," he said with a weak smile. "First time in their lives." Keanu nodded. "They needed to see the man. You are not the man you were." As the lights dimmed and the hospital fell quiet again, Keanu remained by his side, humbled by the sight of redemption, made real not in grand gestures, but in a father's tears and two sons' forgiveness. The courthouse in downtown El Paso stood solemn beneath the morning sun. Its stone facade framed by rows of news vans and camera crews. Reporters filled the steps, their microphones flashing under the light as they shouted questions that would never be answered. Inside, the air was thick with tension, part anticipation, part judgment. Carlos Diaz sat at the defendant's table, dressed in a plain gray suit. His wrists bore faint marks where the cuffs had once been, but he held his head high. Maya sat a few rows behind him, reviewing files, while Keanu stood quietly at the back of the room. He had avoided the cameras outside, slipping through a side entrance, wanting this moment to belong to Carlos, not to the actor who had defied headlines to stand beside him. The courtroom buzzed with whispers as the prosecutor rose. "Your Honor," she began, "the government presents evidence establishing that Carlos Diaz served as a security operative for the Alvarez Syndicate between 2009 and 2015. His duties included protecting high-value shipments, maintaining operational secrecy, and providing cover for illegal transactions. We acknowledge that Mr. Diaz later offered cooperation, but his prior involvement cannot be ignored." Carlos listened silently, his hands folded before him. The words stung, but he didn't flinch. When the prosecutor finished, the defense attorney, an older man with silver hair and kind eyes, stood. "Your Honor, my client does not deny his past, but he came forward, willingly, at great risk to his life. Without his testimony, 2 major cartel networks would still be operating across the border. He asks not for absolution, but for the court's understanding." The judge, a stern woman with sharp features, nodded slightly. "Mr. Diaz, do you wish to address the court before sentencing?" Carlos rose slowly. His voice, when it came, was low but steady. "Yes, Your Honor." Every eye in the room turned to him. "I don't have excuses," he began. "I did terrible things. I justified them because I was scared, because I wanted to feed my family, because I told myself it was the only way to survive. But fear doesn't erase guilt. It just delays the day you have to face it." He paused, glancing briefly toward Keanu, who gave a small nod of encouragement. "I came forward because of a man who refused to see me as lost," Carlos continued. "He believed I could still make something right. Without him, I wouldn't be standing here today. I'd still be hiding, or worse. I owe him more than my life. I owe him my conscience." A faint murmur spread through the gallery. Reporters scribbled notes furiously, cameras clicking softly in the hallway beyond. Carlos took a slow breath. his eyes meeting the judge's. "I plead guilty to my crimes, but I ask that you remember one thing. Sometimes a man can't find redemption until someone else believes it's still possible." He sat down, his voice echoing faintly in the silence that followed. The judge regarded him carefully, then turned to the defense. "Will the defense be presenting any character witnesses?" The attorney hesitated. "We hadn't planned to, Your Honor." A calm voice spoke from the back. "I'll speak." Heads turned instantly. Keanu Reeves walked forward, his dark suit simple, his face resolute. The room fell completely silent as he took the stand. Keanu placed his hand on the Bible, swore the oath, and sat in the witness chair. His posture was calm, but his eyes carried the quiet weight of conviction. The courtroom, packed with reporters and curious onlookers, seemed to hold its breath. The defense attorney stepped forward. "Mr. Reeves, could you please explain your relationship to the defendant?" Keanu nodded. "Carlos Diaz was my bodyguard for nearly 10 years, but he was more than that. He was a friend. He protected my life more times than anyone will ever know." The prosecutor leaned forward. "And you're aware of his criminal history?" "Yes," Keanu said plainly. "And I'm also aware of the good he's done since walking away from that life. People love to measure others by their worst mistakes, but I've seen the man behind them." A ripple moved through the crowd. The judge raised a hand for silence. The attorney continued. "Can you tell the court about a time when Mr. Diaz protected you?" Keanu's voice lowered slightly. "Years ago, in Vancouver, a man with a knife came after me outside a studio. Before I could react, Carlos stepped in front of me. He didn't hesitate, even when he knew he could be killed. He took the blade across his arm to stop the attacker. Afterward, he told me he was just doing his job, but I knew it was more than that. It was loyalty. It was courage." He paused, looking toward Carlos, whose eyes were shining with emotion. "That's who he is. Not a criminal, not a villain. A man who's made mistakes but refuses to let them define him." The defense attorney nodded. "And why are you here today?" Keanu looked back toward the judge. "Because I owe him. Because when the world turned its back on him, he still protected others. And because I believe redemption isn't earned in silence, it's earned by standing up when you could have stayed hidden." The judge studied him carefully. "Do you have anything else you wish to say, Mr. Reeves?" Keanu drew a slow breath, his words deliberate. "Yes, a man saved my life. Now it's my turn to save his honor." The courtroom fell utterly silent. Even the faint hum of the air conditioner seemed to stop. Cameras clicked softly, capturing a moment that would echo far beyond those walls. For a long time, the judge said nothing. Then she leaned forward, her voice quiet but firm. "This court will take your words into serious consideration, Mr. Reeves. The law may judge deeds, but it also recognizes courage and change." She turned to Carlos. "Mr. Diaz, sentencing will be postponed pending review of your cooperation and testimony. Until then, you remain in federal custody, but under protection, not punishment." Carlos bowed his head, tears gathering in his eyes. Keanu gave a small nod, a silent promise that he would not walk away. As the gavel struck, the sound echoed through the courtroom, not as an ending, but as the beginning of redemption. The courthouse was quieter than it had been in weeks. The reporters still filled the marble halls, but their voices had lowered to anxious murmurs. The world waited to hear the outcome of a story that had captured every headline, an actor defending a man accused of working with a cartel. Inside the courtroom, Carlos Diaz stood once more before the judge. His hands trembled slightly, though no cuffs bound them this time. The light through the high windows fell across his face, soft and solemn. Keanu sat behind him in the gallery, flanked by Maya and the defense attorney. The judge read from her notes, her voice steady but not unkind. "Carlos Diaz, this court has considered the evidence presented, your cooperation with federal authorities, and the testimony of those who have spoken on your behalf. It is clear that you committed serious crimes, but it is also clear that you took extraordinary risks to atone for them." Carlos bowed his head. The room was silent, except for the sound of pens scratching against notepads. "For these reasons," the judge continued, the court grants leniency. You will serve a reduced sentence of 5 years in federal protective custody with eligibility for early release based on continued cooperation. A faint gasp rippled through the crowd. Carlos exhaled shakily, tears pooling in his eyes. Keanu's shoulders eased for the first time in days. The judge looked directly at Carlos. You will live under supervision, but make no mistake, your life is not over. What you do from this point forward will define whether today's mercy becomes a mistake or a milestone. Carlos nodded. Yes, Your Honor. Court is adjourned, she said, striking the gavel. The sound echoed through the chamber, final and freeing. As the agents escorted Carlos toward the exit, he turned to look back at Keanu. For a long moment, neither spoke, but Keanu gave a simple nod, one that said, everything words couldn't. Carlos smiled faintly through tears, whispering, "Thank you." Outside the courthouse steps were a sea of flashing lights and microphones. The crowd surged the moment Keanu appeared, his calm figure emerging through the noise. Reporters shouted from every direction, "Mr. Reeves, do you believe justice was served? Are you aware your testimony might have influenced the verdict? Wasn't it risky standing up for a man linked to the cartel?" Keanu paused at the top of the steps, the afternoon sun gleaming against his black suit. The noise swelled, waiting for his answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady, carrying above the chaos. "Justice isn't about erasing the past," he said. "It's about choosing who we become after it." The shouting stopped. Cameras froze mid-motion. Reporters lowered their microphones. His words hung in the air like a quiet truth that silenced the noise. He didn't wait for follow-up questions. Keanu simply nodded to the crowd and descended the steps, Maya following close behind. The swarm of cameras moved, but kept a respectful distance. By the time he reached the car, the world had already begun to react. By evening, Keanu's words had spread everywhere. The clip of him standing on the courthouse steps was replayed across every major network and shared millions of times online. Commentators called it one of the most powerful moments of the year, an actor reminding the world that compassion could stand beside justice without weakening it. On social media, the phrase began to trend. Honor over hate. It started as a simple quote beneath his photo, then became a movement. People shared stories of forgiveness, second chances, and lives rebuilt after mistakes. Veterans spoke of comrades who'd turned their lives around. Teachers shared letters from former students who'd once been expelled and now mentored others. Even strangers posted messages of hope. If Keanu Reeves can stand for someone's redemption, maybe we can too. Maya watched the headlines from her office late that night. "You've done more for public understanding than any press conference ever could," she said when she called him. Keanu's tone was quiet. It wasn't about press. It was about truth. "You really think he can make it through this?" she asked. He looked out the window of his hotel, the lights of El Paso flickering in the distance. "He already has. The hard part was believing he deserved to try." Meanwhile, inside a secure wing of a federal detention facility, Carlos sat at a small table, a guard standing nearby. A television in the corner played a muted news segment, Keanu on the courthouse steps, his words scrolling across the bottom of the screen. Carlos watched, unable to look away. For the first time in years, he smiled without shame. A moment later, the guard approached. "You've got a call," he said, handing him a secure phone. Carlos lifted it to his ear. The voice on the other end made him close his eyes. "Papa?" It was Mateo. His son's voice was stronger now, older. Carlos swallowed the lump in his throat. "I'm here, mijo. How are you? We saw you on TV. Mom said people are calling you brave." Carlos shook his head, tears welling again. "No, son. The brave ones are the people who believe we can change." "Like Mr. Reeves?" Mateo asked. Carlos smiled. Exactly like him. When the call ended, he sat in silence for a long time, the phone still warm in his hand. Across the country, strangers were saying his name with kindness instead of contempt. His sons were safe, the past was behind him, and for the first time, he could imagine a future worth living for. That same night, Keanu sat on the edge of his hotel bed, reading through hundreds of messages flooding his foundation's inbox. Letters from ex-convicts, soldiers, widows, teachers, all thanking him for reminding the world that redemption was possible. He closed his laptop slowly, his expression calm and reflective. The world had turned a man's shame into a symbol of hope. And as Keanu stared out the window into the quiet Texas night, he whispered the same words that had started it all. Justice isn't about erasing the past. It's about choosing who we become after it. The morning light spilled softly through the wide windows of Keanu's Los Angeles home. The city below was waking, the quiet hum of traffic blending with the sound of distant waves. On his kitchen table sat a small stack of letters neatly bundled, the top one marked with a federal return address. Keanu took a sip of coffee, set the mug down, and carefully opened the envelope. The paper inside was worn at the edges, written in tidy handwriting that carried both weight and humility. At the top it read, Federal Correctional Institution, Protective Unit, Carlos Diaz. He began to read, Keanu, the letter started, I still don't know how to thank you. Every time I try to put it into words, I stop, afraid I'll ruin the meaning. So I'll just tell you what's been happening here. Keanu leaned back, eyes following each line carefully. Carlos wrote about his days inside the gray mornings, the echo of footsteps in narrow corridors, and the smell of strong coffee in the mess hall. But the letter wasn't filled with despair. It was filled with change. I started helping in the library, Carlos continued. They needed someone who could organize the English materials. Before long, a few of the younger inmates began asking for help with reading. Some of them remind me of my boys, restless, stubborn, but still good-hearted beneath all the noise. Keanu smiled faintly. Carlos went on, describing how those informal lessons had turned into something bigger. He began teaching English classes 3 nights a week. Then came writing exercises, letters to families, poems, even short stories. I told them that words can build bridges where fear used to live, he wrote. That writing is a way to remember who you were before the world broke you. At first they laughed. Now they bring me notebooks. Keanu's eyes softened as he read further. Carlos wrote about a young inmate named Luis Alvarez, barely 19, serving time for a gang-related charge. He reminds me of myself at that age, the letter said, lost between pride and survival. I told him about you, about what it means when someone sees you, not for what you've done, but for what you can still become. He didn't say anything then, but yesterday he handed me a drawing he made. It was of 2 men, one holding a shield, the other holding a candle. The words hit Keanu deeply. He paused, exhaling slowly. Carlos's letter continued. Sometimes I wonder why you didn't give up on me when everyone else did. I've asked myself that question every night since I got here. The only answer I can find is this. You saw the man I wanted to be before I ever did. He ended the first page with a simple line. You didn't just save my honor, Keanu. You saved my soul. Keanu lowered the letter for a moment, the morning light tracing across his face. The city outside faded into silence as he folded the page gently, almost reverently, before turning to the second sheet. The second page began with a different tone, lighter, steadier, as if Carlos had found a rhythm within his new life. I never thought a place like this could teach me peace, he wrote. But maybe peace isn't about where you are. Maybe it's about who you decide to be, even when no one's watching. Carlos described his small cell, a concrete room, barely large enough for a bed and desk, but now covered with drawings and handwritten quotes from the men he was mentoring. Every wall is a reminder that transformation is possible, he wrote. The younger guys call me Professor. It started as a joke, but it stuck. I don't correct them anymore. He went on to share how he had written to his sons again, this time without fear. The last letter I sent them wasn't about regret. It was about hope. I told them I was proud of the men they're becoming, and that I finally understand what kind of father I want to be when I walk out of here. For the first time, I think they believed me. Keanu smiled softly, imagining the boys reading those words. Carlos's next lines grew reflective. "Do you remember the rosary you took from my apartment?" he wrote. "The one with the broken cross? I used to think it was just a memory of what I'd lost. But now, I realize it's a symbol of survival. Imperfect, but unbroken. Kind of like me. When I pray with the men here, I tell them faith isn't about being clean. It's about being willing to start again." The letter ended simply, yet profoundly. "I don't know what will happen when I get out. Maybe no one will remember the name Carlos Diaz, except the people here. And that's okay, because I'll remember the man you believed I could be. You taught me that redemption doesn't begin with forgiveness. It begins with responsibility. I carry that lesson every day. If anyone ever asks what you did for me, tell them you reminded a broken man that even in the darkest place, light still finds a way in. Thank you, my brother, for standing by me when I couldn't stand myself, for seeing me when I had disappeared. You didn't just change my story, you gave it meaning. Carlos." Keanu read those final words twice, then folded the letter carefully and placed it back into the envelope. He sat in silence for several minutes, the morning sunlight slowly climbing across his desk. Beside him, resting against an old photograph of his late sister and their mother, lay the rosary from Carlos's apartment. The metal cross still bore its small fracture, but the beads caught the light like drops of silver. Keanu placed the letter next to it, aligning the two objects side by side. His fingers lingered on the page, tracing the faint grooves of the handwriting. He whispered quietly to himself, "You made it, Carlos." The house around him was still, the sound of the ocean faint through the glass. The moment held a quiet beauty, a sense of something completed. Forgiveness, not spoken, but lived. Keanu sat back, his gaze soft, the morning light warming his face. He didn't need headlines or praise. The proof of everything he believed in lay right there, one letter, one rosary. And the peace that comes from knowing a man's soul had finally found its way home. 2 years had passed since the verdict. The world had long moved on to new headlines, new scandals, new stories. But for Keanu, the memory of Carlos Diaz remained quietly alive, etched into his days not as a wound, but as a reminder of what redemption looked like when someone refused to give up on another human being. It was early spring in California, and the sky was painted with soft clouds. Keanu arrived at a small community center on the east side of Los Angeles, a modest building surrounded by murals of doves and outstretched hands. Today's event was one of the many his foundation sponsored an outreach program for youth rehabilitation and mentorship, helping young men and women rebuild their lives after incarceration. As he stepped out of his car, volunteers moved busily around the courtyard, setting up food stations, folding tables, and boxes of donated clothes. The air buzzed with the hum of conversation, the rhythm of music playing softly from a speaker. Keanu pulled on a plain baseball cap and rolled up the sleeves of his black shirt, blending in with the crowd as he always did. He had come quietly, not as a guest of honor but as a worker. He greeted people, shook hands, and helped carry crates of water bottles into the hall. The warmth of the afternoon sun fell across the rows of tables where children and parents would soon gather. Inside, laughter echoed, students serving meals, community members sharing stories. For Keanu, these moments were what mattered most. They were proof that light could grow even from the harshest soil. He was stacking trays near the serving counter when 2 young men entered the hall, both wearing volunteer shirts. One carried a box of fruit, the other adjusted a banner above the door that read, "Second Chances, New Beginnings." Keanu didn't notice them at first. He was focused on organizing supplies. But then, as one of them turned, the movement caught his eye. The shape of his face, the same earnest concentration. Something stirred deep within him. The young man was tall, lean, with dark hair, and eyes that carried a calm intensity. The second stood beside him, broader in build, but with the same quiet focus. Together, they worked with ease, laughing occasionally, their gestures natural and kind. Maya, who was coordinating the event that day, approached Keanu and handed him a clipboard. "These two came in from the youth program in Bakersfield," she said. "Hard workers, brothers, I think." Keanu's eyes lingered on them for a moment longer. Something about them felt familiar. Not their names, not their faces exactly, but their presence. A warmth spread through his chest as a thought formed slowly, quietly. When the older of the two turned again, their eyes met. For a fraction of a second, time seemed to stop. The world around them blurred the music, the voices, even the light itself. Keanu saw it, then the unmistakable recognition behind the young man's calm expression. It was Mateo, and standing beside him, smiling faintly, was Luis. For a long moment, none of them spoke. Mateo froze mid-step, the box of fruit still in his hands. Luis looked between them, his smile fading into quiet disbelief. Keanu felt the air shift soft, heavy, charged with something beyond words. He took a slow breath, meeting their gaze. "You're doing good work," he said gently. His tone was calm, steady, but his eyes revealed everything: recognition, pride, and the deep ache of memory. Mateo nodded, his throat tight. "We're just trying to give back," he said, his voice low but sure. "Trying to do something that matters," Luis added quietly. "Someone told us once that helping others is how you start over." Keanu's lips curved into a faint smile. "That someone gave you good advice." They all stood there, surrounded by the hum of the event, the laughter, the shuffling of feet, the clatter of trays, but none of them heard it. For that brief moment, the world shrank to three souls bound by one man's sacrifice. Maya called out from across the room, breaking the stillness. "Keanu, we're short on volunteers at the main table." He gave a small nod and turned back to the brothers. "You two keep doing what you're doing," he said. "You're making him proud." Mateo's eyes flickered with emotion. "You've read his letters, haven't you?" Keanu hesitated, then nodded. "Every one." Luis's voice was soft, almost reverent. "He said you'd keep them safe." Keanu reached into his jacket pocket. For a moment, they thought he might pull one out, but instead he closed his hand over his heart and said, "They're here, always." Neither brother spoke again. They didn't need to. Later that afternoon, the event wound down. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in gold and violet. Families lingered, laughing, sharing stories. Keanu stood near the exit, watching as volunteers packed up boxes. Across the courtyard, Mateo and Luis worked together cleaning tables, loading supplies, offering warm smiles to the last guests leaving. There was something peaceful in watching them. They didn't know that Keanu had funded their college tuition through a scholarship under another name, or that he had quietly arranged housing support through his foundation's network. He never wanted them to know. The point wasn't credit. The point was continuation, Carlos's legacy living through his sons. When the final trucks were loaded and the courtyard grew quiet, Mateo turned for one last look. Their eyes met again, and in that instant, everything that needed to be said passed between them. It wasn't gratitude in words. It was something deeper, a silent acknowledgement of shared purpose, of wounds healed, of a promise kept. Keanu gave a simple nod, the kind that meant, "Go live your life." Mateo nodded back. As the brothers walked toward the fading light, the sound of their laughter drifted through the courtyard, light and unburdened. Keanu stood there alone for a few minutes longer. The mural of doves on the wall caught the last glow of sunset, their painted wings reflecting the orange and gold of the evening. He thought of Carlos, of the man who had found peace behind prison walls, and of the sons who now carried that peace into the world. The wind rustled softly through the trees as Keanu whispered, "You did it, Carlos. You really did it." And in that quiet moment, as the day gave way to night, it felt as though the world itself had exhaled a soft, unseen benediction for a promise fulfilled, and for lives forever changed by one man's choice to believe in another. The desert sunrise was gentle that morning, spilling gold over the horizon like a slow forgiveness. Keanu stood at the edge of the same landscape where, years earlier, he had once searched for a man the world had already condemned. Now, The air was still, peaceful, as if the land itself remembered what had happened there and finally exhaled. He opened the small leather-bound journal he carried everywhere and sat on a rock near the old road. The sound of the wind was soft enough to hear his pen moving across the paper. "Darkness," he wrote, "cannot be fought with hate. It only grows stronger that way. You fight it by understanding, by seeing the human being behind the mistake. Sometimes redemption begins when someone chooses to believe in us when we no longer can." He paused, letting the words settle. He thought of Carlos, of the way his voice had changed in that final letter, the steadiness, the calm acceptance of a man who had finally forgiven himself. He thought of Mateo and Luis, the way they had smiled quietly at the charity event, carrying their father's spirit forward without saying a word. Keanu closed the journal and looked out over the desert, his heart full of a kind of gratitude he couldn't quite explain. This place had once been filled with fear and gunfire, with secrets and couplet, desperation. Now it was silent, a symbol of how even the harshest places could become peaceful when someone chose compassion over vengeance. He stood, brushed the dust from his jeans, and started walking back toward his car. In the distance, a small sign stood by the roadside. It read, "Casa Honor, a place for second chances." The building wasn't large, but its walls were bright, painted with murals of open hands and olive branches. Children's laughter floated from the courtyard, where volunteers worked with families, wives, sons, daughters of those still serving time. Some of them had driven hundreds of miles just to find support, to feel seen again. Keanu entered quietly. Inside, the smell of coffee and fresh paint filled the air. A woman greeted him warmly at the desk, unaware of who he was beyond being one of the many donors who helped build the center. "We just opened the new mentorship room," she said with a smile. "We named it after the man whose story inspired this whole project, Carlos Diaz." Keanu's throat tightened slightly, but he smiled. "That's beautiful," he said softly. On one wall hung a framed photograph. Carlos teaching in the prison library. A group of young inmates gathered around him. Beneath it was a plaque that read, "Honor is not what we're born with. It's what we choose to rebuild." Keanu stood there for a long time, studying the photo. The kindness in Carlos's eyes was unmistakable. It was the same look he had seen in Mateo and Luis, the same look that came from surviving darkness and still finding light to share. Keanu walked through the halls of Casa Honor, his steps slow and thoughtful. The center buzzed with life. A group of teenagers painted murals on a side wall, words like faith, rebuild, and forgive, written in bold colors. In another room, a volunteer counselor read to a circle of young children whose parents were incarcerated. Every voice, every smile, carried the quiet echo of redemption that had begun years ago with a single act of belief. He stopped near the back of the building, where a glass window looked out toward the open desert. A plaque beside it listed the center's sponsors, most of them anonymous. At the bottom was a small line of engraved words, dedicated to those who never stop believing in the goodness of others. He rested a hand against the glass, watching the sunrise reflect off the sand. The light was soft, golden, calm, the same sunrise he had once seen on the morning he found Carlos at the ranch. But today, the air no longer carried tension or fear. It carried renewal. A group of volunteers passed behind him, their laughter gentle and easy. Keanu turned, nodded a quiet greeting, and stepped outside into the courtyard. The mural of doves that stretched along the wall reminded him of the one at the youth event in Los Angeles, where Mateo and Luis had volunteered without needing recognition. He sat on a wooden bench near a small fountain. A cool breeze swept across the courtyard, carrying the scent of desert sage. Closing his eyes, he could almost hear Carlos's voice again, the way he had spoken that night in the mine. Broken, but hopeful. "You deserve a second chance, too," Keanu murmured, repeating the same words he had once said to him, "and you found it." A quiet peace settled over him. He opened his journal once more and wrote a final line beneath the morning's reflection. Redemption doesn't erase the past, it transforms it into purpose. He closed the journal, holding it for a moment, before tucking it into his jacket. The sound of laughter rose again from inside the center. A little boy ran past, holding a sketchbook with a drawing of a man holding a candle. Keanu smiled, recognizing the same image Carlos had described in his letter. The story had lived on not through fame, not through speeches, but through actions that would outlast them all. He stood, took one last look at the center, and began walking toward his car. The desert stretched endlessly before him, glowing beneath the first rays of a new day. At the top of the hill, he stopped, turning to face the horizon one last time. The sun had fully risen, its light spilling over the land that had once been marked by fear and blood but was now washed clean by time and grace. Keanu whispered, "Rest easy, my friend. The world remembers." He stood there for a while, his silhouette outlined against the dawn. Then, with quiet resolve, he walked away, leaving behind the past but carrying its lesson forever. As the screen fades to gold, Keanu's final written words appear. Sometimes, all it takes to change a life is one person who refuses to stop believing. And then, as the music swells softly, 3 questions linger for the viewer. An invitation, not just to think, but to feel. Do you believe everyone deserves a second chance? What would you have done in Keanu's place? Tell me what story you'd like to see next with Keanu Reeves.